Hello, everyone. Dr. Stephen Freiberg here, aka TheDADesthesiologist, continuing my interview series where we interview physician fathers. And I'm very excited today. I have the one and only Dr. Jed Wolpaw. Dr. Wolpaw is really a phenomenal mentor and colleague, and now a friend of mine. He was, I believe, my assistant program director when I was still a resident, but now he is currently the residency program director for anesthesiology and critical care medicine at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. He's an assistant professor of anesthesiology and critical care. He works both in the operating room and in the intensive care unit, and is really involved in resident education, resident well-being, and if you still haven't heard of him, you've probably heard from his very popular ACCRAC Podcast. It's an incredible podcast, and I think his listenership has grown into such an amazing way. And in addition to all that, I've gotten to observe him. He's a wonderful father to three beautiful children, and I can't wait to learn more about him today.
Stephen, thanks so much for those kind words and having me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm super excited. So I guess first, just tell everyone a little bit about your journey. I know your route's a little bit untraditional. Is that a word? Untraditional? I think so. In terms of arriving where you are today. So just tell us a little bit about how you decided to go into medicine and the decisions and process that got you to where you are today.
You are correct. It is a winding road. So I'll give you the outline and you're welcome to ask for more specifics. I grew up outside Cleveland, Ohio. I went to Brown University undergrad, where I was interested in history and education, and actually went straight to do a master's in education after I graduated from Brown at Harvard Graduate School of Education. And then I took a job teaching ninth grade world history, which I did for 2 years, and then decided to make a fairly large change, though still into an area of an area that had a lot of education involved. So I moved into deciding to do medicine, had grown up around it. My whole family are doctors. And so I did some pre-med stuff and then went to medical school at UCSF in San Francisco, and then initially matched into emergency medicine, thinking that was what I wanted to do, but then kind of fell in love with critical care. And back then you couldn't do a critical care fellowship out of an emergency medicine residency. And so I knew that if I wanted to be an intensivist at the time, I had to switch. And so put a lot of thought into that, ended up switching and going back to UCSF to do my anesthesia residency, and then came to Johns Hopkins in 2014 to do my ICU fellowship, and then stayed on faculty. And as you said, I fairly early on got involved with the clerkships for the medical students in anesthesia and in critical care, and then became an associate program director for the residency program. And I'm now starting my 4th year as the program director of the residency. So it's an exciting place to be. It's a great career. I've loved it. And despite the winding nature of where I've gotten, I'm very happy to be where I am.
And I certainly think it seems, and I don't have a lot of ways to compare, but you're a reasonably young, or at least sort of newish into the world of academic medicine as an attending. And I'd argue you were pretty well on the fast track to everything that you've achieved. I think you've done so very quickly. I think that's only a testament to the passion you have for your career and also for educating the residents, which I think has really become your niche in the world of anesthesiology and certainly in academic medicine.
Yeah, that's nice of you to say. I would say that a lot of it is also just due to dumb luck and kind of being in the right place at the right time, which I think is an important lesson actually for folks, is that, we get so discouraged and disappointed when things don't go well. We don't match at our top place, or, we don't get the job we wanted. We don't get the promotion we were hoping for, whatever it may be. And we then, I think, so commonly say to ourselves, well, everyone else is getting it, or this must be something wrong with me that I didn't get it. And we forget that, a million times every day, people are not getting opportunities. And it may be because it just wasn't the right time and place, right? So a great example is the fellowship match. I mean, residents get so bummed if they don't get their top match in fellowship. And yet it may be that the place they applied only took internal candidates that year, right? So that nobody else got in who wasn't a resident at that place. And so you could be beating yourself up saying something's wrong with me, I failed, and yet it wasn't you at all. It had nothing to do with you. It was just the time and place. And then it, of course, works in reverse, that sometimes you're in the right place at the right time. And I just happen to be someone with a background in education and an interest in resident education, where early in my time as faculty, we had a transition and the chair was looking for someone to take over, and it all kind of fell into place. But I think that's less to do with me and more to do with just what the time called for.
Sure. Well, whether by luck or hard work, I think they've found the right person to lead all these initiatives. And now tell us a little bit about your dad status, your life as a family man. I know you've told this story a couple times, and if you want to go into all of it, I love hearing it. If not, I can shorten it. But I understand that you married your attending when you were a medical student. And it sounds much more scandalous when I say it that way. I know it went through all the proper channels, but I mean, that's the dream right there, isn't it? I think that's what Grey's Anatomy is based on.
That's right. It was certainly my dream, and I'm thrilled to be living it. And absolutely, I joke around and say all the time that it was very Grey's Anatomy. And again, same thing. I'll give you the short version, and I'm happy to tell more. But yes, the short version. Well, I guess to answer your first question, my status is that I am married to a wonderful woman who's a physician as well. She's a pediatrician, and we have 3 daughters. The oldest is about to turn 9 in a week, and then the middle is 7, and the I guess not so baby anymore, but I think of as the baby is now more than 2. She's about 2 and a quarter. So really just the highlight of my life, as I know you know, with wonderful little kids and a beautiful daughter of your own and a son, that it's really special to have little kids, and they're still at an age where they're all wonderful and they love their parents. They haven't yet. I haven't had teenagers yet, but I'm dreading it. But I'm not there yet, and I'm glad I'm not. So anyway, that's where I am with my family. In terms of the story with my wife, yeah. So I was at UCSF as a 3rd-year medical student, and I did this kind of atypical 3rd year. Instead of doing rotations, discrete rotations, I did a longitudinal integrated clerkship. So I did, for example, 1 day a week. I did internal medicine for the whole year. So it was, a kind of setup like that. But part of it was doing occasional shifts in the pediatric acute care clinic, where my wife, Betty, who at the time was not my wife, worked. And so I worked with her over the course of the year there. And I was taken with her right away. She's gorgeous, of course, but she's also got this incredible energy, and she's an amazing teacher and physician. And so I always thought in my head, if I weren't her medical student, I'd love to ask her out. But I did not until the end of that year, when I knew I wasn't going into pediatrics. I wasn't ever going to be back and working in that clinic or doing a pediatric rotation. There'd be no circumstance under which I would be her medical student anymore. And it just so happened that my very last shift in that clinic, she was the attending, and I was working with her. And I went home and I thought to myself, well, it's now or never. And I composed an email to her asking her out. And then I almost didn't send it. I was terrified of the idea that not really so much that she would reject me, because I kind of expected that, but that she might send it on to the dean or something, and I would be, reprimanded for unprofessional behavior by asking out and attending out. I had no idea. And I almost didn't send it, and then I did, and then I tried to unsend it, but it was too late, and then it went. And, it's funny, I didn't know this at the time, of course, but what she did when she got it was first to be like totally taken aback. She says she wasn't even sure who I was, though and I've always doubted that, but she maintained that. But what she did is she sent it to all her friends, as you could imagine, kind of being like, look at this email I got from this med student. And interestingly, the women were all, her female friends were like, yeah, that's weird. Med student. But the guys, who were all male physicians, right, who had been male med students at some point, all said to her unequivocally, they said, you have to go out with him at least once. That took so much courage as a med student for him to send you that. You cannot punish that type of courage. You have to give him at least 1 date. And she kind of said, oh, man, really? I don't know, think about it. So she ended up asking her boss if it was even allowed. And it turns out that as long as she wasn't going to be supervising or evaluating me anymore, it was fine by the bylaws. And so she wrote me back and said, yep, sure, let's do it. And we went out on a first date. 6 months later, we were engaged, and 7 months after that, we got married. So it was a perhaps potentially foolish thing to do, but it worked out, and I couldn't be happier that I took that risk.
That's amazing. And I mean, what's life without taking at least a few semi-calculated risks? No risk, no reward. So
that's exactly right.
Really a great story. And I could tell right away, just as I'd interacted with you as a resident, how passionate you were about your family. And then when we were at a wedding of one of our mutual friends together, I felt really bad because here was probably, I don't know, the first trip you'd done without kids in who knows how long, and somehow became the de facto babysitter for my daughter who was in the wedding. And I felt terrible, but you seemed like you were in your absolute glory. And I knew right away, I was like, this is the sort of family man that obviously I can only hope to be, as well as a clinician that I can hope to be.
Well, it was fun. Your daughter, as you know, is absolutely adorable. And I always say if there's one thing I have gotten good at, it is keep entertaining little girls. Right? I am now on number 3, so it's a lot of fun. And your daughter's adorable. It was great. I was happy to get to hang out with her a little bit.
Thank you. And so, I mean, I mentioned a little bit of all the things you're involved with at Johns Hopkins, and you've got 3 children. How do you balance the time commitments for the things that you're so passionate about? I know you're very sort of passionate about being efficient, but what are, I guess, the best tips, or how do you make it all work?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm still trying to figure it out a little bit, so I don't want to put myself forward as an expert. I do think that it's a challenge. It's a challenge to balance those things. And I do believe to a certain extent, and there are limits on this, but I do believe to a certain extent that it's not as much about quantity as it is about quality. So I do think that it's possible to be a working parent, whether a mom or a dad, who works a lot, as physicians mainly do, but to be home and make that home time count. Now, I think there's a limit to that. So if you were, and I think there are some neurosurgeons, maybe as an example I think of, who work so much that they actually just hardly ever actually see their kids. And that is, you could have great time, but if it's, 1 hour once a month, that's probably not enough.
Right.
To each their own, and that may work for some families. But I think for me, that wouldn't work. But I do think that having a reasonable amount of time, and I can't, numbers are going to vary, but being home for dinner, putting them to sleep, it's not going to be every day, but as much as possible, having some free weekends when you're not on call, where you can kind of spend the whole weekend together, go to their sports games. These days where there are no sporting, classes, we do all kinds of stuff. We've been baking a ton together. So that kind of stuff is really, I think, important. The other thing that I really feel strongly about is that when you do have time, spending some of it one-on-one, I think is really, really key. It's tempting to do it, take your whole family or at least all your kids and give your spouse a break. And that's fine to do plenty of time. But I think that what I have found, and I imagine this is true for anyone, at least with kids anywhere near an age, is that it's just not the same for them. When they get to have either parent one-on-one, it's an incredibly special time for them that can't be matched by having their siblings around.
Right.
And so I have tried for a very long time, actually, since I remember doing it with my daughter Leah when we first moved here, and she was only 18 months old at the time. So, she wasn't really cognizant of what we were doing, but I still did it, which is we call it special time. And so I try to do it at least once a month, ideally more, but at least once a month, where I take one of them. And I don't do it yet with Grace, even though I just said I did it with Leah at 18 months, but Grace is 2 and not, I think, yet someone who's going to want or crave that individual time quite yet. But with Ava and Leah, I take them and I let them pick. So almost always involves a treat of some kind. We rarely let them have junk food. And so on these occasions, they usually like, at least pre-COVID, to go to Starbucks. I'd let them get a hot chocolate and a cake pop or something. And that was very, very special. And then we'd sit and we'd talk. And, we'd play 20 questions, and it evolved, right? So as an 18-month-old, Leah and I would just like toddle around the yard and, go alone to throw sticks or something. And, now we'll play 20 questions or, talk about their friends, whatever. They sometimes, Ava's gotten very into, she's an incredible reader. This is the oldest, but she likes when I read to her. And so she'll ask sometimes if we can just sit and read outside or, whatever. And so it's really nice. That I can't recommend that highly enough. Even if you don't have a lot of time, I would take whatever small sliver of that time you do have and do some individual one-on-one time. So I think that's really key. And then I think you have to give yourself permission to never be, perfect at anything. I am by far not the perfect father. I'm not the perfect husband, and I'm not the perfect physician. And you can't be. I don't think anyone can be perfect at all those things all the time. And I do see this in my residents sometimes. I think especially, not limited to, but often in women with newborns who just feel like they can't be, the mom they want to be to that baby, the wife they want to be to their husband, and the resident that they want to be in the program. And my heart goes out to them because nobody could, right? There's nothing deficient about them. It's an impossible task to do all those things perfectly. And so what I try to say to them, to the extent that I can, and I'm glad that I have female colleagues who've been through it, who can also mentor them through this, is that that's okay. It's okay to let one or the other fall through the cracks sometimes, and to give yourself permission for that. And that's really important. If you have an expectation on yourself that you're going to be home for dinner every day, or that you're going to put your kids to sleep every night, then you're going to feel like you failed. And that may not be a realistic expectation for your job. And similarly, if your expectation on yourself is that you're going to pump out, 5 first author papers a year, and maybe you were doing that before you had kids, well, you may not, because those weekends you were sitting in the lab or, punching through those databases, you're now going to want to spend some of that time with your kids. And so you have to be okay dialing that back a little bit. And I think similarly, it's so crucial if you are in a married, or in a partnered relationship. So in other words, if there are 2 parents, I think it's really key to communicate well around roles, who's doing what, and when do people need some alone time. That's really key, because don't forget, you want to be a spouse, you want to be a resident or attending or physician, and you want to be a dad or mom, but you also have to be a person and people need their own time. You need some alone time. And so I think you need to trade off, when are we going to give each other some of that alone time? And when are we going to have time just for the 2 of us? And when are we going to have time one-on-one, each of us with the kids, and then as a whole family? And as I said, that makes it sound like a lot of stuff, but it doesn't have to happen, it's not like every week you have to do all 4 or 5 of those things. But you do need to talk to your spouse and make sure you're both on the same page, because I do think I see people getting into, difficulties in their relationships when one person has an expectation, the other person either doesn't realize they have that, or it just doesn't think it's realistic, but they haven't communicated that. And so I think you have to know what the other person is thinking and feeling, what they need, what you need, and how you can balance all that stuff. So it takes a lot of work to do this stuff well. And as I said, I am not perfect at it by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think those are some of the key things to keep in mind.
And I think what I'm really hearing in what you're saying is, obviously we all are trying to do our best to balance things out, but just being cognizant and making ththose intentional decisions and communicating with your spouse or your children, can really do wonders in trying to maintain that balance.
Yeah, I absolutely, communication is so all across all these domains, right, is
Sure.
so key. Communicating with your spouse or partner or significant other, communicating with your kids, and communicating at work with your colleagues, and if you're a resident, with your program director, and letting people know when you're struggling, if you need help. Letting expectations be known. If you can't make it to work because your kid is sick, this is pushing it to an extreme, but just not showing up is poor communication, right? But letting your program director know, I'm so sorry, my kid is sick, and my spouse is out of town, and my nanny's sick too, whatever it is, right? And communicating. And I think it's probably most important with your partner, if you have one, because again, communicating with your kids is important, and I'm sure only gets more important as they get older. But the complexity of an adult relationship is, in some ways, I think, much more fragile, right? And people have more needs and more demands on them, and especially if it's a two full-time working. I was going to say 2 physician, because that's just what I know, and my parents were both physicians, and my wife and I, so I don't actually know what it looks like, but I'm sure you can just as easily have 2 full-time working parents who, one is not a physician, that would equally be difficult to navigate. And I would also say that I think it's really important, if one person in the partnership is either not working at all, they're stay at home, or they're working part-time, that you have to be very careful, if you are the one working full-time, to not assume that that's not hard work. Because I'll tell you, for example, that my wife used to work full-time, and then when we had our 3rd kid, cut back to fairly about half-time ish. And it's not like on those days she doesn't work, she's golfing. She is doing an unbelievable amount of work. She may be doing more work on those days than I'm doing at work. She's
Right.
certainly just as tired. So, I think that's really, really key, because that's a source of, I think, a lot of potential resentment and conflict if that's not respected.
Sure. So, with all of that, what is your favorite part about being a physician?
So It's a broad question. Obviously, am blessed that I love a lot of the things about my job. I think probably two of the most significant sources of joy and satisfaction for me are first the teaching and mentoring that I get to do as a program director and just in attending in an academic center, but certainly as a program director. To get to, as you know, having been one of the residents, we have about 80 trainees, resident physicians in anesthesia here, and they are just an incredible group of people who, are working incredibly hard at all the things we just said, at living their lives, at being parents, many of them, at being spouses or building a relationship that may lead to a marriage, being a physician, taking care of patients, many times taking care of their own parents, and they're doing all of this, and they're so intensely focused on all of these things and able to just make such a difference in the lives of each other. They're generous. They, give to each other, support each other in their own, with their patients, with their colleagues, with their friends, with their families. And to just get to be a part of helping them get through this milestone of training and get to where they want to be in terms of their future in anesthesia, plus getting to know them, learning from them, that is just every day, more than anything, that's what gets me up and going. The second thing is I very much do enjoy the actual practice of medicine, and especially, I like anesthesia and critical care, but I think the critical care time in the ICU is particularly rewarding because it's, it's involving not just patients, but families as well. And one of the things I told you when I was an intern in the emergency medicine program, I really fell in love with critical care. And that really came from doing an ICU rotation, which I hadn't done before, and seeing how much of a difference a really good attending can make, or really good physician, I guess doesn't have to be an attending, can make for a family of a very critically ill patient. Colin Feeney, I still remember his name, was my attending that month. He's the head of critical care at Highland Hospital in Oakland, or at least was. I hope he's still there because he was amazing. One of the absolutely most just amazing physicians I've ever known. And watching him work with families around these issues and helping them let go if they had to let go of a dying family member and get through that, or helping them maintain hope if that was the way to go until that person could make some improvement in recovery, helping them understand these complex decisions. All of that is really rewarding and one of the things I love about my job.
Absolutely. And what's one of your favorite parts of being a dad? I know there's a lot to love, but if you had to narrow it down a little bit.
Well, one of the things I always think of is that, and I know it will go away at some point, and I don't know what I'll do, is the walking in the door and having 3 little girls just come sprinting up screaming, "Daddy, daddy, daddy, daddy," and just jumping all over me and sweeping them up in my arms. I mean, it doesn't matter how exhausted you are. It doesn't matter if you just got home after, 28 hours without sleep. You walk in the door and your heart just swells, right? That is it's such a wonderful, wonderful thing. And that unconditional love of those little, in my case, little girls, but I'm sure it would be true with boys too. And that's really wonderful. And I know that, well, at least I'm prepared, I guess. I'm aware that probably when they're, 15, 16, they're not going to do it anymore. But I'm enjoying it while it lasts. So that's wonderful. And then, it's so fun to see them grow and change, especially we're watching right now the 2-year-old, kind of acquire language, right?
Right.
Having started whenever, a year ago, and now, as it progresses. And I didn't see as much of it with my first 2 because I was a resident. So I was just not around as much. And I'm around a little more now. And it's just, I'm able to see more, I think, of that language development on a consistent basis. It's incredible. And just that development in general, watching them learn how to talk, and then watching them learn how to, think through things. And my older daughters right now are learning to play chess, right? I mean, that's wild. And kind of watching that process and the questions that come up and what isn't and isn't intuitive. So just seeing that development is fascinating. And I think, feeling like, much like teaching anybody, feeling like, being able to be a support and a help to these kids as they grow. And they, it breaks my heart when they come home crying from school because somebody said something mean, but, being able to help them think through what that means and what's an approach. And what if somebody said something mean to somebody else and you heard it, what would you do? And what would be a way to approach that? So I think trying to help them develop into moral, responsible, thoughtful, generous children and then adults. It's an incredible challenge, and I have no idea if I'm doing it right or not, but I think that challenge is one that is really worthwhile. And I think that every time you see them do something kind, that feeling of, this, we're getting somewhere, is great. And so, I think those are some of the things among many, many that are really nice.
No, absolutely. I'm a big fan of the run home or run to you greeting as well. I hope that doesn't change anytime soon. So I think, especially coming from you and your wife are both physicians, the likelihood that one of your or all of your children might express an interest in going into medicine is pretty high. And medicine's a complicated place right now. What would you say to any of your children if they said to you, either tomorrow or perhaps when they're entering college or getting through college, Dad, I want to be a doctor?
Anytime they say anything right now of what they want to do, I just say, that sounds great. And it has varied from firewoman to pet store owner to professional singer to doctor to teacher to artist. And I'm sure there are many I'm not thinking of. Paleontologist. There's absolutely, in my mind, nothing to do but say, that sounds awesome. Can't wait. For now. Now, if I had a college-aged daughter or child right now who came to me and said, in their first or second year of college, I'm thinking about doing pre-med and going to medical school, I would say, I would want to be supportive. And I'd say, that's great. You should do what you're interested in. I would encourage them, no matter what it was, whether it's medicine, law, anything, to do what I tell, medical students to do when they're trying to decide on a specialty, which is spend some time. You grew up around doctors, but that's one small subset. So go talk to other folks. I'm happy to set that up and meet with people in different specialties, talk about their life, ask them where they think medicine is going. I think, as you said, though I love my job and I love medicine, the future is wide open. I personally don't think it's going to be bad. I don't think we're all going to be out of jobs, whether in anesthesia or just in general. But I think you want to know how people are feeling and get different views and decide if it's something for you. It is a very long road, which right now is a very expensive road with the loans people have to take out for medical school. There's some hope maybe that with the COVID crisis and thinking about the sacrifices that doctors have made, that there may be some changes in terms of the ability to forgive loans a little easier, but there still is a loan forgiveness program, and I think that's reasonable. So I would not, I know there are some physicians who say I would never want my kids to go into medicine. I'm not one of those. I would be perfectly fine. I think one of the things about medicine, of any specialty, is that, I think, and we take it for granted because we're in it, right? We don't sit there and think about this every day. But it's an incredible privilege to never have to question whether what you do in terms of your job is a generous, helpful thing for humanity, right? I do think there are folks, and not all by any means. I have one of my closest friends is a lawyer who spends all of her time doing advocacy work for immigrants, right? So it's amazing that. But I imagine, maybe, I don't know if I'm right, that if you're a corporate lawyer who's doing nothing but writing contracts for multi-billion-dollar corporations, or if you're an investment banker, I mean, there might be. And there's nothing, I'm not opposed to those careers, right? There's not wonderful people in those careers. But I imagine there might be times where you think, where you have a little bit of a crisis of conscience and you just wonder, I'm making a lot of money, but is this helping humanity? And part of I know that partly because there are people, we routinely have people apply to residency who were investment bankers, who were lawyers, who decide to go back to medical school because they have those feelings. So I think we are incredibly lucky. That's never a question, right? I mean, I bet, Stephen, you've never woken up and said, I wonder if I'm helping humanity in what I do, right? No, I mean, every day you are saving lives, protecting people while they have heart surgery or other surgery. It's something we don't think about a lot, but I think we should realize that we're lucky to have a job that gives us that kind of moral satisfaction. And so that's one of the things I would think about if my kid was thinking about it as well. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe physicians will make less money in the future. Maybe, the practice will change. But that's one thing that won't. You still will be taking care of patients and helping people in their most vulnerable times. And that's, I think, really not something to underestimate.
Sure. there's never a crisis of sense of purpose, I think, pretty strongly in medicine.
Yep.
So, and speaking of always taking care of patients, I know, again, it's crazy times, and you have been about as frontline as you can get. I know you've worked and spent some time in the COVID ICUs at Johns Hopkins. And for those who don't know, I mean, these are units entirely dedicated to patients who not only are with COVID, but some of the sickest ones are requiring ventilators and whatnot. And at least luckily at Hopkins, they have a pretty good fleet of PAPRs. For, again, folks who don't know, that's almost the whole spacesuit getup, which with the shortage of PPEs, it's a pretty lucky position to be in. But it just shows you how intense what you're having to do has been. And, there's different information every day and data's changing every day, and it's hard to ever know what's right. But what, if you could sort of give one takeaway to the general public about COVID currently, what do you think that one takeaway would be?
I think a takeaway for the public would be, don't underestimate this virus, because it's, while it may seem, you may know people who had it and, they're fine now. They were never hospitalized. Hi, Dylan.
Guests. Hi.
Hi. You may know folks who've had it, who have recovered and done fine, never were hospitalized. We, as you know, Stephen, I'm sure you do too, we see the people who die from it and who really struggle and whose lungs get just destroyed. And, it's not, so don't take lightly the relaxing of social distancing. It's a small price to pay. Wear a mask, stay apart from people. If you do go out to eat, be careful, try to wash your hands frequently, etc. These seem like no big deal, but I think they're really a big deal, and we have that perspective. So that's one major thing. I think, this isn't quite a message for the public, but just, for those interested, I have found the most difficult part of working in the COVID ICUs and working with COVID patients, and just even working in the hospital during the time of COVID, the restrictions on visitors. That people die alone. People die at best with one person with them, if not none. And having someone on a Zoom call is obviously not the same. And that's really, really hard. Having to tell families that they can't come in for a critically ill loved one is really devastating. That's been probably the hardest thing.
I can only imagine. And then another hard thing that I know we're all dealing with, and you're in a especially unique situation. Your wife is Black and your children as such are biracial. And I'll never forget, I made a rather insensitive statement when I was a medical student, and it was actually a professor of public health who put me in my place more so than I probably ever needed to be put into that place in my life. And she said to me, you are at the time I was single, but a single straight white male, there is no more privileged position than you have right now. And you and I share that relative privilege, but you again have this unique foot, in a way, in both sides of the what a person might experience being a person of color. What is our responsibility to, as these privileged people? What can we do? What is our responsibility to making humanity better?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Stephen. And one of the, George Floyd's death and many, many others who have died at the hands of police brutality, way disproportionately Black and Latino and minority folks, it's a tragedy, and there's no way around that. It's a horrible thing. It's something that needs to change. I do think that it is a wonderful thing to see that finally people are paying attention. Now, the Black community had no choice but to pay attention to this for a very long time. But, to now see white people with that privilege, acknowledging, realizing that privilege, realizing that life is not the same, that this country does not treat people of color the same as white people. So the first step, I think, is opening your eyes to that. And, being aware that, as you said, being a white man in this country, especially a straight white man, carries with it an unbelievable privilege. The examples, we could go on forever, but I can go for a run at any hour of the day and no one's gonna, shoot me or chase me or think I'm robbing something. I can go into a store and no clerk is gonna follow me around and keep their eye on me. I can walk into a patient room and guess what? They assume I'm the doctor, not the janitor or not the nurse. it's really, and again, this list could go on forever. Yeah. So I think acknowledging that is really important. And unfortunately, a lot of white people are not in a place they can acknowledge that. And you see that with the White Lives Matter, signs and counter protests, which, I think is just horrible. But I think it's our job as other white people to try to get that message across, to try to explain and teach people why Black Lives Matter needs to be Black Lives Matter and not all lives matter, why the history matters. And then I think, you hear a lot, it's not enough just to say, hey, I support Black Lives Matter. I think you have to do something that makes you uncomfortable, because that's what happens, right? For us, we can say we support things all day long, but I think you have to push yourself to say, what could I do that's uncomfortable? Is that calling your state senators and asking them to push for a bill to address racism in policing or defund the police or whatever it is that you support? Is it, for me, I'll tell you, despite the fact that this is very much, as you said, at home, and I'm again very grateful to my wife for helping me understand, right? Because that's the other thing, is that as a white man, we can hear the stories, but we can never understand what it feels like to have lived life as a Black person in this country. But my wife helps me understand a little, right, what it's been like for her and her friends, especially her Black male friends. Sure. And so I think, what can we do to support them so that it's not we're not just saying, well, this is their fight, because it's not. It needs to be our fight. And I think, for me, part of that was thinking about and whether or not I should address this issue of the George Floyd murder and everything on my podcast, knowing that there would probably be some amount of listenership. I mean, I have more than 50,000 listeners, so some portion of that, listenership, I'm sure, would be upset. And yet realizing that despite the fact that that was an uncomfortable thing for me to think about, there was some fear of doing it, that it was definitely the right thing to do. And so I did. Similarly, going to protests, we took our kids to protests. It was really I think it was difficult to have those conversations afterwards when we went to one, to come home and have them say what is going on and have to tell them, especially for me, knowing that my kids will be seen as Black women, that having to tell them that they may be in danger at the hands of the police, and then have to tell a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old why that is and what the history is. That's difficult, but I think also important to do. So I don't hold myself out in any way as an expert. I think that if people, especially white people, want to help, they should ask at their workplace, at their institution, with their friends, what can they do? What can they do? What can they do to help? There's a lot of great, movements out there, protest movements with websites that make suggestions to take action politically. I do think, and I hope I'm not being overly optimistic, that we are, for the first time in a long, long time, seeing real and rapid change where people's opinions are changing. You see that with support of Black Lives Matter has just skyrocketed. Belief on the part of white people that the police are racist and do treat Black people differently than white people, that has skyrocketed. So I think these are opinions that once changed, I think and hope will not change back. And so we may be seeing a time where we will actually finally see, universal, not just the Black community pushing, but everybody pushing for change. And I think we could see some really much overdue, much needed change, but we all have to not let it die. We have to keep supporting it, pushing for it, and helping each other. And then, like I tell my kids, right? If somebody says something mean, it's uncomfortable to speak up and call them out, but you've got to do it. If somebody makes a racist comment, a sexist comment, a homophobic comment, you can't just say, well, I didn't say it, so I'm in the clear. That complicity is not good enough. You have to speak up and you have to stand up and say that's not okay. And it's that way that I think we make change.
Fair enough. Well, Jed, Dr. Wolpaw, again, I can't thank you enough for spending the time with me today. I can't tell you how much I admire you as a clinician and a father. And so for you to take the time out of your day to chat with me means a lot to me. I hope anyone checking it out means a lot to them. But tell folks where they can find you, either for your podcast or your social media or anything that, if people want to know more about Dr. Wolpaw.
Absolutely, Stephen. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I think you are a fantastic father and physician as well. I love what you're doing with the dad anesthesia stuff, and your TikTok, your Instagram. It's wonderful. Your blog. I am on Twitter at Jed Wolpaw, JWOLPAW. The podcast, which you mentioned, is at ACCRAC Podcast. It's ACCRAC Podcast, all one word. People can check it out there. There's also an ACCRAC Facebook group that people are welcome to join and take part in. I've got a great team actually of some social media folks and a tech lead who do really nice work with putting up some questions of the day and review questions and some interesting topics. And so anyway, folks can join in there, and I look forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. And I guess we'll finish by saying Happy Father's Day.
And same to you.
All right. Take care now.
Bye, Steve.